Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear? If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker? They're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 236. Today, I'm talking with my buddy Ted Bright about knowing when you found a mature buck's bedroom. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Happy 4th of July weekend to you. The weekend's coming up. Hopefully everyone's got a little bit of time off, do a little bit of barbecuing, hanging out outside. Hopefully it's not crazy Africa hot out to where you're actually able to be outside and enjoy some decent weather. It looks like we're going to have some decent stuff roll in this weekend. So I think, fingers crossed, that I'll actually be able to get out the last few trail cameras that I have to set out here. I was hoping to maybe make a run to the north to that big piece of public, but I just don't think it's going to be in the cards. And the good news is that I've got some cell camera pictures that are rolling in. So I'm not chomping at the bit to get up there because I've got some intel rolling in some of the areas that I thought were going to be maybe the more primo areas. Do have a couple regular cameras that I need to get up there and check, but that's probably going to be more of a game time decision. Maybe, I would say September, probably right before my season opens here locally, because I come in just a little bit earlier. I'll probably go up and check them, so I kind of know what's happening up there if I need to make a run up there in October at some point. Just kind of play it by ear at that point. I would like to get 1 or 2 more cameras out up there. Just don't know if it's going to be in the cards. But this year was really all about just learning the area as much as I could, and if I got a couple hunts on it, then that was just going to be kind of a bonus for this year. So, but man, it's crazy. We're at the 4th of July weekend, and it just, the season, let's see here. We got July, August. I got like 2.5 months for me, roughly, before the season will kick off, because I open mid-September here in the part of Pennsylvania that I live in. And it's kind of crazy to think that bow hunting is just right around the corner. I couldn't be more excited. And just in the nick of time, man, it feels like my archery game finally kind of all came back together and started clicking. The past 2 weeks, I've probably shot the best that I've shot even before my injury. It seems like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, things just kind of started to make sense. I started feeling good. Everything started feeling right, feeling like everything was in place. It was a little bit of a struggle, man. I'm not going to lie. It was even as far as like gripping my release and stuff like that, like fiddling with that even. Like I couldn't get comfortable, and I would tweak little things here and there, and it just seemed like I would feel good one day and then the next day I wouldn't. And it seems like the past 2 weeks, everything just kind of snapped into place, and shots breaking felt great. I went from kind of shooting known yardages to, taking my pin to 26 yards, and I use that all the way out to 30. That I just set one pin at that yardage, and that's what I use for pretty much every distance, because I'm not going to shoot at a whitetail, for all intents and purposes any further than 30 yards, just in the areas that I hunt. Not going to get those opportunities to shoot beyond that. And so, my final kind of step whenever I get ready for the season is I move from, shooting, if I'm at 30 yards, moving my pin to 30 and shooting, just making sure that I'm on. I want to be consistent. I want to, hit bullseyes, right? I'm trying to stack arrows and stuff like that. And then once I start feeling good with that, that's whenever I'll dial my pin to my yardage that I'm going to use for whitetail hunting. And I usually like to do it sometime in, June, July, something like that, about that time frame when I start jumping in my saddle in the backyard and taking some reps out of that, once a week or whatever the case is. Try to shoot every day as much as I can, probably a little lighter on it this year than I usually am just because of the shoulder injury. I don't want to overdo it. But started feeling good. So I dropped that pin to 26 yards and, started flinging arrows at a bunch of different yardages, without a rangefinder. I just kind of know where 30-yard mark is in my yard where I shoot. And then I just kind of walk around at different yardages and shoot from those areas. And try to make kill shots and shoot, at a 3D target. And so, when I started stacking arrows and shooting well, I definitely put a little smile on my face because I was on the struggle bus for a while. And the little thing in the back of your mind starts to creep in where you're like, man, is it ever going to come back and feel like it used to? But finally it did. So I'm super stoked with that. But anyway, we're not going to belabor this up front today. We're just going to kind of get jumped into today's show. First and foremost, want to just kind of throw out the caveat. I'm having a chat with my good buddy Ted Bright out in Missouri. We did have some technical difficulties along the way as you get toward the end of the podcast. Just as a heads up, we had some audio challenges and stuff like that, but really cool conversation. Ted's in Missouri. He's a mobile hunter. He's been hunting mobile for years. He's kind of a disciple of the beast kind of approach to hunting. I had him on, I don't know, probably a year ago. It might be even creeping up on 2 years ago since he was on last time. But he had a killer year this past year. We talk about his whitetail hunt that he had in Nebraska, which was awesome. And then he did a lot of self-filming this year. I think that Nebraska hunt was with our buddies from Tethered. And then he self-filmed, a really cool story about a buck, and that he put out a YouTube video with it of this killer deer that he had an encounter with the year before, and put the puzzle pieces together and was able to kind of bring it all to fruition. And we kind of walked through that hunt because it's one of those things where, he really relied on reading topo and kind of understood, even from a map perspective, where his best opportunities were probably going to be the prior year. Ran in on like a whim. I won't say a whim. He knew a good deer had potentially been in there and just like figuring out where exactly. And he kind of dialed it in, man, and stuck an arrow in a pig. And he got it on film, self-filmed it. It's just a really cool story, the way it all kind of came together and how he had to kind of, play his access just right and stuff like that to make it all kind of come together to get that arrow off. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's podcast. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today you'll recognize the voice on the other end of the line. It's a fella I haven't had. I think it's probably been pretty close to a year, man, because last year when I was planning my Missouri hunt, you and I talked, and you gave me a little bit of intel after we got done recording. But I'm talking to none other than my good buddy from Missouri, Ted Bright. What's going on, brother?
What up, Clint? Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. So how's your how are things, man? You got a cocktail in your hand, right? I think we've determined that we both have a beverage happening.
Yes, sir. I am drinking a glass of Barrel Armida bourbon. And I got to tell you, I'm quite impressed with it.
Okay, so where did you get the drop on this? How did you find out about that? Because I've never heard of it actually.
I stumbled upon it at a liquor store, a relatively large, like hole in the wall liquor store in Salina, Kansas.
Of all places, Kansas, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you read the label on there, it says it's like vanilla and blackberry and something else, like undertones that sound kind of sweet itself, but right. It's 56.9% alcohol. So the stoutness of the alcohol balances it out really well, and it's excellent.
Nice, man. I might have to try to locate some of that. So you sent me a picture of that as I was finishing eating my dinner real quick after I got back from physical therapy, and I was like, oh man, I need to up my game. So I went and poured myself a glass of Basil Hayden. I refer to Basil Hayden as my my summertime bourbon sipper. I typically like really hot bourbon, so like Booker's or Baker's, like something that's in like the 100+ proof or whatever, 120 proof. I think it's Booker's, but Basil Hayden I think is like 80 proof, and I kind of prefer it during the summer because it's just not quite as hot. So that
Right,
that
right.
is that is my summer sipper, and I usually drink it neat. But today I have a cube in it. I figured today was like a good cube day. It's kind of warm outside. I did a bunch of yard work, so I figured we'll drop a cube in it today for the festivities of summer that's just about upon us here. So I can hear
Sounds
that.
good. I'll have to try out the Basil Hayden.
Yes.
And uh, do you do you make spheres at home?
Do I make what?
Spheres, ice spheres.
Oh, yes, I do. I make spheres. Yes, I have a sphere. I have a sphere now. So yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah,
the
I
only way
love
to
the
fly.
spheres.
Yeah, because they melt at the right rate.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then I haven't done this yet, but I've just because it's I don't know, is it really worth it? But if you want a perfectly clear sphere, then buy distilled water.
I've never done that before. I've just used my old fashioned tap water. So I might have to give that a whirl, man. That sounds pretty good. I get a little nerdy with like drinks and stuff like that because I used to bartend for a bunch of
Oh,
years.
fun.
Yeah, and so that was kind of how I made my way through college and like what I did for side money whenever I was in the band and stuff like that. When I would bartend at clubs and stuff like that. So it's like I got pretty skilled at making drinks. So I usually get nominated as the bartender like anytime my wife has a party at the house and or my or if my parents have a party. It's like I ultimately end up becoming the bartender. And one of my favorite things to make is a chin chin. That's like what I drink in the fall. That's like my fall hunting drink. And it's like I make my own simple syrup, and it's a little bit of like apple cider, bourbon, simple syrup, a little bit of cinnamon as well. And it's just like the perfect fall bourbon beverage. So
Oh, that sounds great.
yeah,
Kind
yeah.
A little old fashioned it sounds like.
It is a little old. It is a little old fashioned, with just a little bit of a twist on it, to make it more, fall, like specifically fall. Like the difference really is like the ginger simple syrup, is really what kind of makes the difference. But I do like me an old fashioned, but I try not to have too many of them because because it'll hurt you. That simple syrup with the sugar, it just like they go down so quick and so easy. That you don't realize how many that you've had, and like before you know it, you're like five chin chins in, and you're totally not hunting the next day. So,
Yeah.
but I've started even taking like a bottle with me on my trips. Whenever I go out, in the trailer and stuff like that, just like a little. I don't know, man. It's just something about being in that camp atmosphere, even though it's like that little travel trailer that I built. Having a little nip at night before I go to bed, which just makes it feel that much more cozy for whatever reason. Um, just night. I don't know. There's something about being in hunting camp and having a little nip. I don't mind having a beer, but like something about being in hunting camp and having like a glass of bourbon just feels right to me. I don't know about you.
Oh gosh, I could probably do a better job of that. I get so focused that I don't want to be groggy the next morning or whatever. So I'm
Hmm.
usually the first one up, and
Yep.
I don't know. I probably need to do a better job of that.
Right. Well, hey, it's like my thing is like I don't do it every night. It's more so like those nights like you had a long day or maybe it was like rainy and cold out and it's just like before I go to bed, it's not like I have a big glass, but just enough to have like a couple nips. You know what I mean? It just sends me off into la la land and then I'm good to go. You know what I mean? And I wake up on
Yeah,
time and good to go the next morning. Not enough to like hurt you, but just enough to make you sleep really sound is kind of I guess where I'm at. But
yeah, yeah, definitely.
so maybe you need to add that to your arsenal. But hey, maybe not, man, because you had a pretty good year. Don't don't listen to this guy over here. It's like you're sticking plenty of deer with whatever you're doing. So I wouldn't mess with I wouldn't tempt fate. Maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I hear you. It's always a delicate balance, right? Of
Yeah.
fun versus, being so focused on the task at hand. But
Hmm.
yeah, it just depends on where and when too.
Yeah. No, 100%, man. Like I'll give you an example. When I was in Iowa, like I didn't have a beer, didn't have a drink, like nothing the whole time I was there. Right. Um, I was just kind of solely focused on the task at hand, which was like trying to fill an Iowa tag. Um, when I was in Missouri, I think I might have had a beverage one night, I think. But that we were also doing a lot of moving around, and just because I walked into every place blind, and so like I knew the next day was just going to be a ton of scouting. You know what I mean? Like it was going to be a ton of moving, and it was hot. That was the other thing too. It was crazy hot. But when I'm in
Yeah,
Ohio,
that sucks.
yeah, that did suck. And when I'm in Ohio and I kind of know the area that I'm going to be in, it's like I might have a drink in the evening when I get home, you know, after I have something to eat, you know, or I might have like a beer or whatever afterwards. But it's definitely not a party situation. Put it that way. It's pretty tame.
Right. Unless you kill a booner, then it's a party situation.
Well, yeah, then I'm gonna kill it, and then I'm gonna hurt the next day, and I'm not gonna care. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
that's always
That's the best hurt ever.
yeah, exactly. That's always kind of the thing that's in the back of my mind is I'm like, I'm gonna bring this bottle, and I might have a nip or two like along the way, but I'm really waiting to like dive into it when I kill, and then you know when it ends up happening is either I don't, or in the case of an Iowa, it's like I killed like the very last day and literally killed it, took it to the taxidermist, and then started driving to Pennsylvania. Like there was no time to there was no time to party. You know, the party was like me by myself, like with like 17 hours of asphalt between me and home. That was essentially the party. But speaking of parties, man, how's your spring been, dude?
It's been good. Let's see here. You know, I mean, first of all, everybody is healthy and happy, and
Good.
you know, kids are back in school, and you know, all that good stuff. Everybody's good.
Good.
I've been so busy with work that my turkey season wasn't anything near what I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just filled out my MDC spring turkey survey the other day, and I calculated all because they asked for a report day by day of that you hunt, and
Right.
I was only able to hunt 6 days in Missouri, and 2 of those days I wasn't, you know, the primary shooter.
Right.
But anyway, so I killed 2 birds, and I killed my first Rio ever.
Oh, nice.
In Kansas, and yeah, it was fun. I was able to call in a bird for Carl Kasuth, and it was his first ever spring gobbler. So
Nice.
That's a big deal, you know, when somebody shoots their first gobbler that comes in gobbling and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Nice.
And my son and I were able to go together a few times. So it was fun.
Nice. Now, was Carl's hunt, was that in Kansas?
No, that was in Missouri.
Well, it was in Missouri. Nice. Awesome. Was it local to you, or did you guys go somewhere else?
It was pretty close to him, actually. Okay. I live like an hour from him, so it was closer to him. But
got it.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Nice. I didn't realize Carl lived in Missouri. For some reason, I thought he lived north for some reason, like Minnesota or something.
Ernie lives there, and that's where the Tethered headquarters is.
Right, and that's probably why I was thinking that's where he was. That's where he was at. But that's cool, man. Yeah, it's always fun to watch someone get their first whatever it is. You know what I mean? I'm sure he was just stoked out of his mind whenever it happened too. I bet.
Yeah, he was. He definitely was. In fact, after reviewing the footage and all, he's like, "Man, I was even more excited than I thought." It was really cool.
That's awesome, man. So with your work schedule and stuff, man, are you getting out doing any, you know, did you get all your kind of postseason scouting and spring scouting and all that stuff you wanted to get done? Are you like knee deep in all that stuff, or are you wrapping it up?
Man, I didn't really get a whole lot of scouting in this spring. Just really didn't have a chance to, you know, and I switched jobs back in the fall, and then I went back to a job where I was previous, and it's awesome. You know, I love it. But right now, when you sell capital equipment, you got to make hay when the sun is shining, and the sun's shining really bright right now.
Right.
So I'm making a lot of hay right now.
Right. Nice.
But you know, it's the nature of it that there will be slower times. And, you know, at the same time, I guess, you know, when you're in sales, you want to try to hit all of your goals, you know, before, well, for me, like, you know, at least October-ish, because I want to be able to, you know, hunt
Right,
in late October and November, of course. So
right, right.
I suspect that'll be the case this year.
Right. And so are you gonna kind of prioritize the pieces that you have familiarity with? Do you feel like this upcoming year, or is there any pieces that you're kind of eyeballing still that kind of have you intrigued that might be newish, or what's your plan given kind of where you're at in terms of like how busy you are and stuff like that? What are you thinking you're gonna do?
All right. So that's a great question, because if when you ask any of these guys that kill big bucks on a consistent basis,
Hmm.
they have tabs on probably I don't know, what do you think, probably
Hmm.
10 to 15 maybe,
Hmm.
good bucks, and there's some trending information that they have a history with,
Right.
and continuing to build throughout the summer. Uh, this spring, I just didn't get a chance to scout a whole lot, so I didn't really add to that.
Hmm.
But going back to like especially late season last year, I've got several good bucks right here around the house. That I shouldn't say, probably 2 to 3 good bucks right here around the house that I have
Right.
some history with and some trending data with, and I still have my cell cans out. I just keep them out all year
Yeah. Yeah.
now. So I've got some information there, and then on public ground, which is what I prefer to hunt. Uh, I've got a few ideas on a few, but not where I really want to be.
Hmm.
But I learned some stuff in the early season last year on a piece of public pretty close by that I think I can put a plan into action, and hopefully, if I kill that buck early, or I just know there'll be a good buck there. I don't know of a specific buck there,
Hmm.
but if I can do that and pull that off, then that'll basically bail me out for the lack of scouting that I've done. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Right. So what about that public piece do you find, like, what is it about it that you like, or that you feel has that you'll have an opportunity there? What is it that's making your spidey senses tingle?
Uh, so that's an easy one to answer, but if I answered it, then that would just open the floodwaters for everyone else, and they could probably be pieced together pretty easily. But I'll tell you offline.
Okay, it sounds good. A perfect answer. That is that is the perfect answer. But man, you had two. Well, let me back up. Let me back up for a second. I think you're right. I think it's interesting that people who are able to get on good deer year after year. It's not by accident. Is kind of what you're saying, right? It's like you usually are keeping tabs on a couple different deer. It's definitely a little bit different in Pennsylvania, at least in the area that I'm in. Just based on the fact that the amount of pressure that you have around here, and the amount of deer that get killed around here, and they just don't get a ton of age on them. So when you do find a couple decent ones, you might only have 2 to 3, and chances are they aren't going to make it through the year. And so it's like you're constantly kind of like turning over new deer, and you're hoping and crossing your fingers to a degree that like one of them makes it through. You know what I mean? That you have some year over year data. Someone asked me at one point if I ever name the deer that I hunt, and I said no. And they asked me why, and I said because they usually don't live long enough to have a name. I was like, by the time I learned that the deer is there, if I don't kill it that year, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to see him again, like the following year. Um, I've at least in the past several years for me on the public that I hunt, it's like I don't think I've ever seen a deer 2 years in a row. Um, but what I have kind of learned, and I'm curious if you kind of find if you find this in Missouri as well. What I have kind of learned is that there's kind of spots that consistently will hold the better deer, and so I just kind of rely on those. It's like I almost am not so concerned with what deer are there or in the area so much as I am concerned in finding the spots where the better deer are spending time. Because if there is a good deer in that area, chances are he'll be in that spot eventually, right? And so that's kind of how I play it. Does it play out similarly in Missouri, or do you? I mean, I only hunted there for a week, and it was awesome, by the way. It's actually one of the places where I'm like, I got to get back there as often as I can. Um, but I'm just curious if you kind of find it similar, or do you feel like you have more deer on public that make it year over year that you can kind of watch?
No, I think you're spot on correct. So, you know, I don't scout as much as I should, as much as a lot of people do, as much as I probably could, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
If I wanted to sacrifice other areas of
Right.
life, right? It's all about time management.
Yep.
So without doing a whole lot of spring and summer scouting, then what you need to have is that library of areas, like you said, that are most likely to hold that big buck. So
Right.
you talk about a big chunk of public ground. There's a very small percentage of it that would be a bedroom for a big buck or a mature buck.
Mhm.
And when you can go across those off the list pretty easily, right? So you have it mapped out, you kind of have a route mapped out,
Mhm.
and you go check those 3 to 4 spots on that piece of public ground, or whatever it may be. You can pretty quickly tell, if there's been a mature buck in that area anytime soon or recently. Even if it is summer scouting, look for
Mhm.
tracks and the creek crossings and things like that. You can find out if there is a mature deer in that area,
Yeah.
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. You don't have to have specific tabs and trends on a mature buck to say, hey, that's the deer I'm going to go kill. You can just have that library of places where they're most likely to be, and then go in and confirm that. And
Right.
if there's not, move on to the next spot.
Right. And I think, one thing and correct me if I'm wrong, like I feel like one thing that you do really well, that I at least have picked up some from talking to you, number one, and then some from watching some of your videos and stuff like that. You actually, I think we covered this in the last podcast you and I did together. It's like you're very much kind of like you have a beast approach to hunting, right? And you do a fair amount of scouting, like actually in the season, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I mean, I scout my way into my tree every time.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people miss that opportunity. And so it's like, to say that it's like, yeah, maybe you don't do as much spring or summer scouting. It's, I don't do a whole lot of summer scouting. Mine is usually like I try to do it right after the season's over and just kind of knock it out and then kind of be done with it and stay out of the, not because I don't like being in the woods. I just, be honest, like I don't want to have mosquito bites all over me from like May through August. You know what I mean? Like if I'm being honest, but there's a ton of value to actually do it during the season because you're seeing what's happening during those specific periods where you'll want to hunt it. So it's like if you're walking to your tree or whatever and you hit this creek crossing or whatever and you find like a big track and it might not be the deer that you're particularly hunting or maybe the one that you kill, or maybe you see a couple big tracks. You're like, all right, there's a couple big deer in here, or you find like a new scrape area that got laid down and it's like the second week of October. It's like, well, hey, mental Rolodex, this spot pops off second week of October, right? You don't know that when you go in after the season's over. You just find a scrape line that's opened up and you have no clue when it was made. So you still have to validate it during the year anyway. And I always say, like, I feel like the scouting you do in season is like, if you could only scout one, let me ask you this. If you could only scout during one time of the season, when would it be? Or not even the season, one time a year, when would it be?
Uh, Gosh, I don't even know how to answer that because I mean, the way that you outlined it there, I agree with.
Yeah.
And first and foremost, I am scouting my way in every single time.
Yep.
So I agree with you on the summer scouting thing. So I hate mosquitoes just like you do,
Mhm.
but by golly, if it was hunting season, I'm going to go tolerate those mosquitoes, and
Yep.
I'm not even going to complain about it. We're just going to talk about killing that big buck, right?
Right.
Uh, I'll forget all about those mosquitoes. But in the summer months, yeah, I mean, my priorities are just elsewhere. My
Yep.
scouting consists of taking the back way to take in my daughter to get ice cream or something, with the binos in the truck.
Yep.
That's what summer scouting is to me because I know what's about to happen during the season.
Yep.
And, you also look at that like, all right, so that scouting into the tree every time has a higher value to me than scouting a big buck coming out of a corner into a soybean field for 6 nights in a row to know that's what he's, during July
Right.
and not taking my daughter to get ice cream,
Right.
and just driving by once or twice to confirm that.
Right.
So I guess the roundabout answer to your question is that it's in season because that's the most recent intelligence.
Right. Yeah. No, I feel the same way. And I mean I do a fair amount of scouting. I forget who I talked to about this. I just talked to somebody about this. We were just cutting up. And actually I think it was my buddy Tony Peterson. I had him on a podcast, and he and I were just kind of shooting the bull, during the podcast. And I kind of said something to the effect that, like, I feel like sometimes people almost over scout during the off season, where it's like, to what you're kind of saying, but way I kind of framed it was in a different way. I was like, look, anytime you can be in the woods, I think it's valuable. So, like, let me just say that before I get flamed and I get a bunch of emails or something that says that I suggest that people don't scout. But I think there hits a point of diminished returns where the amount of time you're spending scouting, you're getting very, very little back. And the way I kind of framed it was, like, for example, if you're going to a new piece, there's a ton of value of scouting it, right? Because you know nothing, right? And so that, you're going to learn 100% more today scouting it than you knew yesterday, right? And then the next day you'll learn a little bit more. But if you've scouted it a bunch of times and maybe you've hunted it, a couple times, it's like, well, every time you now step into the woods, like, that percentage of info that you're getting becomes smaller and smaller, right? And so to
For
me, then,
sure.
it's like, all right, could your time be better spent elsewhere? That's why, for me, a lot of times I won't even re-scout areas that I've hunted. I'll kind of know what's already going on. If I'm going to spend my time scouting, I'm going to a completely new area that I've never been to, and that's going to be what I'm going to spend my time doing, because I'm getting more value out of it. I don't know if you kind of feel the same way, or if you feel differently about it. What do you think?
No, I do. Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, to me, when I love going for hikes. I kind of refer to it as more of going for a hike
Right.
in that, like, late spring time frame. I mean, if I see a rub line, I'm going to check it out, and I'll slow down and everything.
Hmm.
But my goal is to cover a lot of ground and see everything in the woods,
Right.
not just I'm not going to slow down and inspect things to the degree that I would during the season, because it's not as relevant, right? I mean,
Right.
when you're looking at it in the season, you're looking at what tree am I going to pick to kill this buck,
Right.
and I don't see that around here anyway. I don't think that you can really do that um, in the let's say in the springtime for the following fall, just because things change so much.
Yeah.
That area certainly might hold that same buck, but I don't think that you can select a killing tree typically.
Right. Well, not only that, but it's like you have no clue whether that buck that made that sign is even alive at that point. Right.
Right, right.
So it's like,
Yeah,
all that tells you goes back to what I was saying, which is, like, I'll find areas that consistently have buck sign, and I'll prioritize those places, scout my way in during hunting season. And if I find something that kind of is out of the ordinary, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should be checking this out, and this might be where I need to be setting up. Then I do that. But, I'm trying to, I think what we're both saying is that you need to take the information that you're getting at each point of the year whenever you are scouting in context, right? In season, super valuable, because you can probably make a move and make a plan based off of what you're currently seeing. Outside of season, tells you where at one point a buck was, doesn't tell you when he was there, doesn't tell you what buck it was necessarily, but it might be a place worth coming to pass through to check out during the season to see if to validate what you're seeing in postseason. Is kind of the approach, right?
yeah, yeah. I totally agree.
Nice.
Yep. Get in there and check it out, and hopefully you've got your stand on your back or your saddle around your waist, and when you get there, you're consumed with selecting that perfect tree.
Right. And you had a little, and so with that, we're going to make a pivot now, because you had a knack for selecting that right tree pretty consistently this year in a couple different occasions. So if I'm not mistaken, you went to Nebraska, right? That was one of the hunts that you ended up doing, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I went to Nebraska and killed a decent buck on opening day,
Right. So
September 1st.
September 1st. Oh, nice. So it was, you made quick work of that one. So,
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about that hunt, because, people that listen to the show know that I love going to new places and hunting different places, and sometimes just going in on a whim or blind or whatever the case is. And one of the questions I always get pretty consistently on the show from folks that listen or, when they ask questions and so forth is, how I try to figure out a new piece quickly, especially if I'm going out of state or, how do I get over, in the intimidation factor of, a completely new piece and that everything is absolutely unknown. And sometimes it's completely different habitat than I've ever hunted. Like a great example this year is I'm going to Kansas. Never hunted Kansas. Don't know that I'm ever going to get there to actually even scout before I get there to hunt. And the area that I selected was a place that doesn't have a lot of trees because I wanted less hunters, less deer hunters. So I went to an area that didn't have a lot of trees that would force people, if they were going to hunt there, to hunt predominantly from the ground. And and so I'm going to be completely out of my element. So what is it about, like, talk to me a little bit about Nebraska. Like, why'd you choose Nebraska? What was it like hunting there? How did you break down the piece that you were on? Just kind of walk me through your process.
Sure. Yeah, I chose Nebraska quite simply because I had a lot of craziness in my career and job and everything with COVID, and
Mhm.
I was unemployed for a little while. I mean, it was just kind of crazy scenario. So I chose Nebraska because it was last second, and that's all that I could plan to do.
Right. Nice, which is a perfect plan. So, I mean, you walked in then essentially without knowing much about where you were headed, right?
Yeah, I really didn't have any idea at all. I'd
Right.
never been there. Had only aerial scouted it, and
Right.
that was, yeah, that's it.
So, when you got there, like, what was your Oh, let's stop. Let's talk about the aerial scouting first. Like, what did you think of the proposition of hunting Nebraska based on what you were seeing from aerials? I mean, did you see anything that felt familiar, or or were you looking at it going like, man, this is like hunting Mars, like like completely not knowing, completely an unknown situation.
It was definitely like Mars in the aspect that I could recognize that it was unlike anything I had ever hunted before.
Right.
But I mean, it was cool, and I know that anytime you look at it at the aerial maps, it just doesn't. It seems like it's across the board. It doesn't matter what the terrain is or anything. It's going to be bigger when you get there, right? It's going to
Right.
appear to be bigger country when you get there,
Right.
and just take that into consideration anytime you're looking at the screen.
Right. And so did you start kind of marking things off immediately, like places where you knew you didn't want to go? Like, how did you start to kind of pinpoint? Because I mean, for me, when I scout a place, like, really, to your point, 100%, like when you get there, it's going to be bigger than what you thought, right? And it's likely going to look different than what it does, online. But the one thing I've found that is consistent is I can pretty quickly start crossing things off that I don't want to go look at, and then kind of help me focus on like a smaller area to where I don't that's how I reduce the intimidation factors. I take a piece that, just say it's 5,000 acres. I'll take that piece and really quickly get to a place where it's like, all right, I'm really probably only going to focus on like this 1,000 acre area. You know what I mean? Because this is where the stuff is that I feel like is probably going to be either one, seems familiar to me, or two, where just feel like the best habitat is going to be. Do you kind of follow a similar process?
No, I don't do that because I
Hmm.
don't feel like I even have an educated opinion on it.
Hmm.
So the way I do that, Clint, is I will look at this map just briefly, I don't know, 20 minutes, just enough to understand it conceptually and remember a few of like if there's a major river, some major tributaries or fields, food plots, whatever, try to just reference them in your mind, and then call the local wildlife biologist,
Hmm.
because like you said, you're trying to eliminate areas and all this and that, but if you don't have a feel for the land, then in my opinion you're better off asking somebody that has a feel for the land.
Right.
And you'll be able to tell, these guys are typically willing to share information. I mean,
100%.
almost like they're super happy to do it,
Yeah.
like you've made their day.
Yeah.
uh, so that's what I rely on. So, even if I have to sift through some stuff, I want that opinion from that person that knows that land, from a wildlife perspective.
Right.
And then from there, then I will, highlight, preferably highlight areas that I want to go, but then also ask about, well, where should I not go or whatever.
Right.
So ultimately, yes, I want to get to that point. But to me, I think you're just kind of spinning your wheels if you're trying to do all of that on a map without any reference of somebody that's been there and knows the land.
Right. No, that's a great point, man. And that was kind of, truthfully, it was one of the things that helped me whenever I was in Missouri. Cause one, I was talking to you, right? It's like texting back and forth with you, talking with you, and just trying to get a sense of like a couple different places. And then there were a couple places that were a little further west, because the one place I went was in the east, that I actually called, the conservation officer that kind of managed those particular pieces of public, and had a conversation with him. And then he actually had a little bit of info about a couple other places that his buddy managed that he didn't manage, but he knew about, right? And so he kind of started pointing me in a couple different directions, which was super helpful in trying to understand where I needed to be. So I think that's a great piece of advice, is that, yeah, or rely on your friend network, right? It's like doing that, in Missouri with you, whenever I went to Iowa, did the same thing. Going out to Kansas, my buddy Chad's already been out there and kind of made, a couple contacts with some locals and stuff like that we're using to try to figure out what the situation is on a couple of these different pieces that we're looking at. So I think you're right, man. Like, you got to, at some point, you got to try to get some form of intel, from people who actually are there, right? Whether it's social network, local biologists, whatever the case is. Hell, man, social scraping, like go online and just join a forum that is like big bucks of Kansas in the zone or area or Missouri or wherever, and just look to see like where people's photos are coming from and what time of year their photos are popping up. They'll give you a good idea of like when deer are getting killed in those areas. Right.
Yeah, that's something I haven't done. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've looked at the data on the amount of, Boone and Crockett's and Pope and Young bucks killed in certain counties or whatever, but I've not just like searched those forums like that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, just not to give away a secret, but it's like, that's definitely one thing that I've started looking at, is just, if I'm going to go somewhere, I'll just, like, beating a dead horse here, but like, for example, going to Kansas this year, it's like I'll go back and historically look at, people who are in my, or in my friends network on social media, or I'll go on and join a forum or whatever the case is. And I'll just look to see when pictures are being posted, like what's the time frame? Cause that'll usually start to tell me like when deer really start to move. Cause a lot of times when I'm traveling, and this is probably the case for a lot of people, it's going to be around that rut time frame, like last week of October through the second-ish week of November, right? So I'm really looking to see like when does the body count really start to stack up in those areas within that 3-week frame, because that's typically the time I'm going to want to be there, and so it'll start to give me a little bit of a sense of, one, the caliber of deer that's around there, and two, when they're actually moving enough to be killable. So
yeah,
a little not so pro tip is social scraping. So we use it.
I like it.
Yeah, man. We use it in marketing all the time to like find competitive intel, and it just stands to reason that it would work also for deer hunting. So you're out into this, you're headed to Nebraska now, man. Like, so you finally get there, right? Like, I've never been in Nebraska, so it's all foreign to me. What is the habitat and terrain like that you were getting into? Like, I know that there's some areas that they refer to as like the sand hills or something like that. It's nothing like I've ever hunted before, from what I understand. I'm just curious what your perspective of the habitat and terrain was.
So yeah, like I said, it was unique to me. I'd never experienced that before. It's on the edge of the sandhills, and you still see a little bit of that type of sandhilly terrain.
Mm-hmm.
But it was largely, rolling hills, steep elevation changes, and some marshy like bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so, around those bottoms would typically it'd be surrounded by like, a lot of oak and mast trees, and some river bottom trees too.
Right. So when you got there, right, and you killed on the first day that you were there, so you had a pretty good beat on what was going on. But where did you ultimately kind of end up getting into? Like, what was the intriguing thing that led you to the place that you were ultimately going to set up? Was that something that you learned like by talking to a conservation officer? Was that something that you learned by talking to a local, or was it something that you just kind of looked at on a map and was like, all right, based on everything I've learned at this point, this place looks like all signs are kind of pointed to this spot?
So I know, knowing that it's early season, I tend to look at water.
Hmm.
I hold a higher value at water versus food. I think that when a deer gets up from being bedded all day, he's going to find the closest water that's in route, in way of the food that he's heading to. So I looked at that and I saw that in the 30 minutes or whatever of time that I spent prior to calling the wildlife biologist. I saw that certain water source there, and then without prompting him or anything, I asked, what are some of the features you would key in on, or any insight on areas, and he mentioned that. So that was obviously the first, one of the higher priorities that I wanted to check out while scouting, because I got there like 2 days early,
Okay.
and so it was, basically like, I guess you could say, spot number one or A, however you want to look at it. But it was one of the most, it was like the remotest spot that you could get to on there. So it wasn't just that you could just walk to it.
Right.
It was, gosh, I think if I remember right, it was like a 5 mile kayak access,
Hmm.
and then a 3 mile walk of up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, steep terrain.
Wow.
So it wasn't feasible to be in there at first light. So on opening day, we did the whole kayak in, and Dylan Hazen was with me, and we kayaked in, and then hunted close to where we beached the axe for the day, and then we hunted in the morning for a couple hours, and then we went back to the spot, and we were set up at like noonish or so, I think, if I remember,
Hmm.
and then there for the duration. And of course, the sun doesn't set till like 8:30 or something like that.
Wow.
At that time of year there.
Right.
Uh, and I killed this buck. I'm gonna guess probably like 8 o'clock at night, something like that.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, man, that's quite a yak trip, dude. 5 miles. That's that's a fur piece. It,
No hill for a climber.
nice. The and then a 3 mile hike after that, man. Like that's a haul, dude. Like that's
Yeah, it was a late night. Here's the thing about those Western early season hunts. You better just plan on being dehydrated, because you can take a bunch of water, but it's not going to be enough.
right. Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, I was going to ask you what was the weather like while you were there?
It was hot.
Was it
Hot during the day, and it would get cool at night. It was
right?
gosh, I think we were at, I don't even remember what the elevation was, but it was it got noticeably chillier at night than what it does here in Missouri.
Right. Yeah. And that's the kind of challenge with some of those hunts, man. It's like you have to prepare for almost everything, right? Because it's like be 90 during the day and then have like a 35-degree temp drop between that and like when the sun goes down, and then
Yeah, and it's not mid-season when you have your system lined out and everything's a model of efficiency. It's where's this, and am I gonna forget that? And you're feeling your way through.
exactly, man. It's the beginning. I never even thought of that, man. That early opener, because I know for me, it's I for sure at least the first hunt, I'm gonna forget something, in something
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like I've forgotten my release before, it's like just stupid stuff like that. I forgot my sticks before, where it's like I literally just used my predator platform as like a pseudo climber. You know what I mean? To climb the tree. You know what I mean? In my tether. Essentially use that as like I was one platforming. I wasn't one sticking.
Yeah,
I
right,
was
right.
one platforming. And so I've done stuff like that and I never even thought of that. That early hunt, you're out of state in new terrain, it's like you're definitely not going to be 100% prepared. But I mean, you made it happen, dude. So walk me through, like, I watched the video and, you were in a sweet spot, like where it was just like, it seemed like there was a ton of buck activity in that particular area. I feel like it was like one of those swampy little bottoms that you were kind of talking about, or like marshy little bottom or whatever. And I mean, did you kind of learn after the fact, is that just like generally a place, that is holding bucks during that time of year because of there's water there and, obviously a lot of really great cover? Or is that just something that consistently in that area you think, holds deer year round?
Uh, yeah, I don't know, because I haven't been there at any other time, so
Right.
I just don't know if it holds deer year round. But there was a lot of water in that on that piece of ground. But for some reason, it just seems like those bottom marshes, flat, like beaver pond types of areas,
Hmm.
just hold deer, right? I mean, that those bucks could go to any spot in that creek and be less exposed or whatever. But there's something that draws them to those low lying marshy pondy areas, where there's a little bit of open water.
Hmm.
I mean, Dylan and I watched a buck, uh, a good mature buck, almost like prance down the field in a playful manner, and like I don't even know how to describe it. Like jump out into the water, took several steps, like it was like a kid playing in the water, and then submerged his head all the way underwater and came up with a mouthful of some sort of pond vegetation, and it was like shaking his head and everything. It was like it was frolicking in the pond, and I don't know what it is, but something draws them to that. Even though they're more exposed, it's more open, and they could go into the creek that leaves this beaver pond, and be not seen.
Right.
So I'm not sure what it is, but something draws them to it.
Hmm.
Probably just the social aspect of other deer being there too.
Right. Yeah, because you're still in that early part of the season. I mean, where they're probably still kind of bachelored up at that point, right? Because you had a couple bucks in there, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was September 1st, so there were still several bucks that had, were still on velvet. But yeah, the day before we had went in and scouted that, and we watched, I think, a couple of different bachelor groups come to the pond, and it
Hmm.
wasn't, groups of, 4, 5, 6, or whatever. I think it was a group of 2 and a group of 3 or something.
Right. Right. Now your setup, like, were you able to shoot to the water, or how did you set up on that?
No, it was too large of a, I mean, it was diagonally across this thing was several hundred yards.
Okay.
Um, we just picked the area that was most beneficial with the conditions at the time,
Right.
and that was hoping that we would get the thermals late night to jive with the prevailing wind, which was like 30 miles an hour in the
Jeez.
daytime,
Right.
and they were contradicting each other. So it was going to be, we knew it was going to be tough, but we were able to make it work.
Right.
To where the thermals just messed with this buck, messed with his head. Like he couldn't figure it out,
Hmm.
when he did come in, because he came in from behind us, which is always interesting.
Right.
And but you could tell the thermals were impacting his ability to pinpoint us, and he stuck around long enough where I was able to get a shot at him.
Right. Nice. So so was he, when he was coming in from behind you, was he technically downwind of you at that point?
No, he was kind of sidewind of the
Hmm.
thermals,
Hmm.
but he came in super slow. So as he came in, when we first saw him, he would have been literally just out of our scent cone. But then he came in so slow that the wind died down and the thermals took over, and then he ultimately ended up being upwind of us.
Hmm.
But he knew something wasn't quite right. So I mean, we watched him for 20 minutes, I bet.
Wow.
And so over that 20 minutes was when that shift really happened, and it was like, you know, uh, right around sunset. And, when you've got a steep hill to the west of you, and, so the sun set earlier where we were,
Right.
those thermals really started pulling hard, totally changing it. And if that wouldn't have happened, then I probably wouldn't have ever even got a shot at him.
Wow. Yeah. It was interesting watching the hunt kind of play out, because I mean, I remember thinking before you took the shot, I was like, man, he looks like he's gonna spook. You know what I mean? Like before you released your arrow, because I was just like, he was doing that like head bob thing they like to do when they're trying to figure out what's going on. Like you could just tell he was uneasy, but did give you just like enough time to stick an arrow in him, man. But that was awesome. It was killer to see. It was velvet, right? He was still in velvet, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he
No.
was hardhorn.
Oh, was he? I don't know why I thought he was in velvet still, but it was still quite a pack out, man. Like you had the hike back to the yaks, and then like the 5 mile yak trip back. had to be kind of brutal, especially in that heat, right?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. It was awesome. It was physically demanding. I think we got up at like 3 that morning, and we got back from packing them out and everything. And got back to that little sleeper cabin where we stayed at midnight, I think. So we were at it, not just up. We were up and at it for 21 hours.
Man, that's what you call some serious type 2 fun there, man. So let me
Yeah, it was awesome.
who all else did you guys have some other folks in camp at the same time?
Well, Dylan and I were camped just by ourselves, but the THP crew was not too far away.
Okay.
And, we were hanging out with them during the day and everything.
Right. I was just curious if you went and woke anyone else up. Like I would have woke everyone. I would have woke people up at camp and like we're partying. I stuck this deer. Like going back to what we were talking about earlier, I would have been like, we're breaking out the bottle. Let's get after it.
Yeah, it would have been a good time to do it, but no, it didn't happen that time.
No, you were probably dog tired too, man. Like you might have wanted to just fall over at that point. 21 hours, long kayak trip, heat, long hike.
Yeah, I was pretty excited.
Yeah. Nice, man. Well, I watched, I remember watching, not that we're going to do a hard transition here, because I want to talk about the Missouri buck that you killed last year. Because I've watched that video a couple times, actually, being completely honest. Killer deer, number one, and if anyone out there listening hasn't seen it, I would go to Ted's YouTube channel and watch this buck. It's an awesome hunt. But if I'm not mistaken, man, you were hunting a completely different deer than this deer, right? Like at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I see what you're saying. Yes, I was hunting a completely different deer. Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that deer. It was like the split G2 deer or something like that, right? It was a deer that you were hunting prior to this one.
Yeah, exactly. Split G2, probably 150 incher. And I didn't really have any history with him from the year before because I just moved to this area.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm coming into my third season here in this area. And so it's your first year, you just totally thumb to the wind. You know what I mean? Second year, you're trying to kind of piece things together. So this being my third year, I feel like I'm at a good advantage now, but yeah, so last year coming into the early season, I started getting a few pictures after I hung out cell cameras for my first time going that route of a really nice buck coming into a bean field pretty close to my house, here where I can just, access it via e-bike or walk to it and, an adjoining property basically.
Right.
And I hunted him for the first week of the season. I think 4 times I was able to get out, and I got sick of hunting, kind of trying to chase something I didn't really understand all that well, I guess is what it was, and I'm like, I just got sick of it, and so the next day I didn't hunt, I just scouted, and I just was working from home that day, and I went for a walk at lunchtime, and I wanted to check out an area where I knew there was a good buck from last year that I had, the previous year that I had an encounter with where he bedded down like 50 yards from me for 20 minutes or so. And so I went in there and I went to that area, and sure enough, I found where he was bedded. And this was September 24th. So, September 24th of 2020.
Right.
Went in and I made my scouting loop and checked all the obvious places, but I saved this one for last. Because I thought it would be the best and it just made the most sense. And when I got there, I saw what I kind of expected to see, and that was, he is betting on this knob every time there's a south wind, and which is, predominant that time of year, and big clumps of shit everywhere,
right.
Acorn shells all over, rubs all over. He is living on this knob, right? Everything you want to see.
Yeah. What?
And before I got to that knob, I also pulled a trail camera down at the base of the knob. So obviously, I was very excited to check that camera when I got back home. But let me back up just a second. So after I got the trail camera, and as I'm heading to this knob, I'm intentionally walking as loud as I can. and hoping to get a soft long distance bump,
Hmm.
not get up on him to where he could even possibly smell me or anything like that.
Right. That's
Go.
so that's interesting. You answered the one question I was going to ask you, which was like, did you have a trail camera nearby there that kind of told you he was like to validate like all the signs there, but and which that was all you would really need, but having that validation of like trail camera pictures, right? Is like, okay, the sign is all there and he is there. And that's interesting that you walked loudly out of there. So was the intention that you didn't want to accidentally get too close to him and you wanted to make sure he was moved off before you marched out? So he didn't have he had a subtle encounter and not a really bad encounter. Was that kind of the idea?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted him to hear me coming from 200 yards away and just kind of jog off is the goal.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. And I knew that when I got there, I knew he was in there that day. I could smell that he was there, and I just figured, he's probably going to come back. So I knew I had like 20 minutes,
Hmm.
is what I was thinking. That was my goal, to be out of there in 20 minutes. And so I just took some quick video and showed the big old piles of shit and all the rubs and the beds around the edge of the knob, and showed the tree that I said, all right, I'm going to come back and hunt this tree. In fact, I had a one climbing stick for checking my trail cameras, and I went ahead and hung that one stick because I knew I was going to come in the morning and it would just be a little bit more quiet.
Right. So I want to back up for 1 second. So what is it about that area that knob particularly, other than like, it's good for a south wind and stuff like that? Was there anything else about that area that you felt made it a good place for a buck to live, or that, a good deer would potentially live there? Was there any other characteristics about it that,
So
that you felt like, just say, for example, if say you didn't even know that buck was there and you just looked at it from a blank slate standpoint and just evaluated the spot, what was it about that spot that made it that you felt good about it?
with a south wind, that's exactly where I would look at on the map and I would automatically hone in on. That's the first spot I would check.
Hmm.
So it's kind of classic, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then when you add to it, the acorn mass that's in that area is unbelievable.
Hmm. It sounds like everything's set up from a classic standpoint of like military crest, right? It's like all the things you would, it's almost like beast bedding 101, almost is kind of what it sounded like.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the aerial, you got to check this out.
Right. Right. So when you originally found the area scouting, you know, did you was it that specific that you were like saw it on a map and you were like, boom, this is where I'm going to go? Or was it just kind of one of those things where you were kind of scouting through and you ended up finding some really good sign there and you were like, okay, stop the presses for a second. I think I just walked into something that might be a gold mine. Or was it very intentional when you found it?
So it would have been the year before that, and it was the first time going into that property after gaining permission to hunt it. And I went in the complete dark. If I remember right, it was like October 23rd of 2019, and I went in completely blind in the dark, just following my Onyx beacon.
Right.
Never having been in this area, and I ended up having that encounter where he bedded down to deer from me for like 20 minutes. And I got some really good video of him and everything. And so, I was just able to see it on the map, see it for what it was. It was classic. So it's worth, throwing a sit at it to see. And, obviously it panned out.
Right.
Now I know anytime I go scouting over in that piece, it's either going to be the first or the last place that I hit just because of where it's located.
Right. Right. So you obviously had an encounter with a really killer deer there the prior year, like you mentioned. So talk to me a little bit about the tree setup. Like, did you set up any differently from that hunt that you had the encounter on, or, or was it the exact same kind of tree, or did you set up in a slightly different location? Like, talk to me about how you picked that tree and what the intent was behind the setup.
So the year prior, my first time in there, I don't remember the conditions, and I'm totally going off memory here. But if I had to say, it would have been like a southeast wind on, weather app. Anyway, don't ever trust weather app. I mean, the weather app is good for the prevailing wind, but that doesn't tell you what the wind is, or the air movement is going to be, because there's a difference between wind and air movement.
Yeah.
Air movement to me is the combination of wind and thermals in any given area at any given time. So my guess is that I went in there probably on a southeast wind that's on my phone, and I was on the other side of the finger ridge, and sure enough, it didn't work out for me. That deer ended up smelling me, but only because I kind of forced his hand, and wasn't just patient, but I had to get to work. So if I could have just waited him out, it may have been different. But regardless, I learned from that and learned how the air movement, the combination of wind and thermals work in that area, to where I set up on the opposite side of the finger ridge. And even though he came from the same direction, I was able to harvest him, easily last year. The second encounter was in the same area.
Right, right. And so, was your access pretty bulletproof in that area, or what was the access like? Getting in and out of that spot.
So the access is interesting because there's no way around it. I have to come from the same direction he's coming from. So instead, the first year I walked from the easiest place to access it, like from the corner diagonally to the stand, right, or to the area of which I picked the tree in the dark, and that would have been okay, but it just didn't work out. But then learning from that, last year on September 25th, when I entered, I walked along the road at 4:30 in the morning or whatever, 4:00 in the morning. I walked along the road and entered in what I knew would be a straight line to that tree, to where that buck had the slightest chance of crossing my scent path as possible. And I had the tree selected that was right next to this big, huge deadfall that really, wasn't likely to bring a deer right underneath my tree.
Right. Nice. So it sounds like you kind of tweak the access a little bit, just kind of being cautious. I've had a place like that too, where it's like I have one way in and one way out, and it is the way that the deer are going to travel. And I've had decent deer in this spot over time. But I just can't ever seem to get the drop on them because the access just isn't great. I've gone as far as like, I don't hunt it in the morning. I'll go in after first light, and it's near a road. And so I'll wait for traffic to kind of come by, and I'll move when the traffic comes by. And so I'll use the road noise as cover sound and stuff like that. But it's still, I've actually even had to just abandon hunting it because it's almost impossible to get in there and kill anything. Because they like to bed right at that kind of entrance point. And so you're almost like just completely screwed from the start. I've gotten lucky a few times and killed some does out of there because they just were bedded further back and I was able to get in. But I've bumped bucks out of there early in the season. Like, our opener is right around mid-September, and I've bumped bucks on multiple occasions walking in there, the last week of September, trying to sneak in, in the morning, and or in the afternoon, doesn't matter. Like, that's just where they bed. And, so it just ended up being a waste of my time. So, and I've done that too, where it's like, there's another piece where it's like, I had kind of iffy access, kind of similar to what you were talking about. And I've just kind of picked out a spot and just barreled through, like perpendicularly, like, I'm going to go straight to my tree no matter what's in my way. I'm just going to go through whatever it is, because I'm not going to cross where I'm expecting these deer to come from. Do you think, where he came from, let me ask it this way. whenever you finally saw him where he came from, if you wouldn't have used that access, would the gig have been up?
If I would have used the access I used the previous year, I would not have got a shot. Yeah, I can say confidently the gig would have been up for sure. And basically, he paralleled my access, right? So he was coming from the same exact direction, but I basically lined it up to where I walked along the road, which he crossed that scent path at some point and wasn't alarmed because there's bikers and walkers and everything else.
Right.
Or he could have been in that other side of the woods already, I guess, but unlikely. And I walked in a straight line from a house that is located there. There's one house in that stretch of road, and I walked in a direct line from that house to my tree, which the house he wasn't going to walk right next to the house. So that means that in order for him to walk, to cross my trail, he would have had to have walked out of way of common sense, from where he would have avoided the house to where he would have avoided that deadfall. That was right next to me, and it's like a 400-yard stretch between that house and where I was, and he certainly could have crossed that at some point, but it was just less likely, put the odds in my favor.
Right. Sounds like the access, the change up of access. And sometimes it's just that small thing, right? It's like, even if you have good access otherwise, or you think you do, man, it's like, it sounds like that's the one little factor that just added enough percentage points in your favor to give you the opportunity. Right. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Exactly. And I wasn't really worried about what happened, later in the morning, but I knew that the thermals, and even when the prevailing wind did start to kick up, would jive in my favor, and they would make that scent cone from my tree where I was hunting. What was blowing my scent would be a small funnel, in conjunction with my access also.
Right. And so I was watching the video, man. I actually went back and watched it again today. And just because I knew we were going to chat today, and I knew I wanted to talk to you about this hunt. And man, it seems like you had him near you for forever. And so how far away was he when you first noticed he was there? Because I know that there were some other deer that were around. You heard like some grunting, you thought it were some does, but then like all of a sudden there he was, obviously not a doe. Right. And so I'm curious, like, how far away was he when you first noticed he was there?
So I can't remember if I saw does first or if I heard that little slight grunt first, but either way, I heard this grunt that was barely audible, right? I mean, you could barely hear it, but there's nothing else in the woods that's making that noise, So as an experienced hunter, you have the confidence to say, that was a grunt. And no matter how much time passes after you heard that, you would still know it's a grunt. In my earlier years, I would have talked myself out of it being a grunt, or, even questioning, was that a grunt,
Right.
And then you just go back to being distracted. But now I know that was a grunt, so I know there's a buck around. And then I saw those two does, and I just assumed that it was does over in that area, and it's total, thick foliage still, of course. And so I'm just kind of, just being as still as I can. I'm observing everything I possibly can. And finally, I see that one of those deer that I thought was a doe had antlers, right? And as soon as I saw it, I recognized that, that these are a good set of antlers, and this is the exact buck that I'm after. And then he was around me for, I can't remember exactly, but it was around 20 minutes, I think. For some reason, 16 minutes is sticking out in my mind, but I know that he was at 16 yards when I was at full draw and ready to shoot. And I may have even got to my click on my hinge. And the last thing I did was I looked down at my camera frame, and I saw that at the top of my screen was the bottom of his feet, his hooves. And I was like, oh man, so I had to let down. First year shooting a hinge, first attempt to legitimately filming, and I had to let down and move the camera, and he's walking away from me at this point in time. And so I ended up shooting him at 26 yards, but I did get it on film, and it was worth it. It was really cool.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, man, that was it made. I mean, I knew that you killed the deer, but watching it again today, it made me nervous when you started moving the camera. Like, not gonna lie, it's like, did you kind of go into it saying that I'm only taking the shot or any shot if it's going to be on film? Because I feel like that's critical when you're filming, that you make the decision before you walk in that I'm either A, only going to shoot if it's in frame, or B, I'm going to do my best to get it in frame, but I'm not going to forego a shot to make sure it's on film. Did you already kind of make that decision in your mind before you walked in?
Yes, and I am the latter. And it's funny because my buddy Josh and I talk about this all the time. And I am going to harvest the deer, absolutely no doubt about it. If it comes down to it, I will prioritize the harvest over the footage, 100%.
Yeah.
Because I'm a hunter, I love it. But when you can get in their bedroom undetected, and the way he came in, and you're just so supremely aware of the conditions at the time, and that buck is comfortable. I never even really sweated it. I mean,
yeah,
I knew with the amount of foliage on there and the wind in my favor, I could get away with a little bit of noise, and it's early season, and the woods were loud, and it was raining acorns, and the squirrels are, going crazy, and there was other deer in the area. There's a lot of distractions, a good, soft, gentle wind the whole time. So I knew that I would be able to get away with that type of stuff.
yeah.
If it was a calm, clear, cold, late season morning, I'm probably going to shoot that deer and then turn on the camera. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that exactly. I mean, I think that's a good point too. Is just like, one dude watching the footage. I mean, that deer couldn't have been any more calm. Like, he had not a care in the world, while he was hanging out in there. But I think that's a good point to make, is like, even if you're not filming, is just kind of being aware of like all those kind of factors, because those can be the types of things that make or break a shot opportunity, right? Like all the things that you mentioned, the foliage, like how cold it is, right? Like, just, do you have cover sound around you? Is there a little bit of a stiff wind? Like all those things, are the things that make or break, like how much movement and or, like, I don't know, shenanigans, for the lack of a better way to put it, that you can get away with in a tree, because there are instances where, man, you just don't have as much cover, or you don't have like a stitch of wind to help you out or whatever. And everything's going to happen, on a razor's edge, kind of, right? And you were in like,
yeah, that's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had that this year, it's like I blew an opportunity at one of the deer I was trying to kill in this one area. And it was like the week of Thanksgiving, I think, or the week leading up to Thanksgiving. And there was this, a scrape area I had known about, and I kind of went in to hunt it, and there were a couple of deer that had been using it over the period of time, and I was happy to kill any one of them. And I was in my tree, and like, this deer popped out, kind of like almost like your Nebraska hunt, man. Like, he popped out from like the last place I would have expected a deer to pop out of, and it was one of those things where late in the season, just got back, or not too long after getting back from Missouri and grinding for 2 weeks. And I probably was a little fatigued, right? And was just distracted. And so when I saw that deer, I actually convinced myself, when I heard it, there had been turkeys earlier in the morning. And I convinced myself that it was still turkeys, in that area. And then I saw a deer, like the body of a deer. And then I convinced myself that it was just some does, or it was a doe. Right. And I'd never picked up my bow. And then the next time I looked over, his head popped out of the brush, and it was one of the deer that I wanted to kill. And by that point, he had already crossed the barrier where it's like, because of where he came out, there was nothing between he and I except air and opportunity at that point. And he was at like 15 yards. You know what I mean? And so, I tried to get my bow. I got my bow off, off the tree, but I couldn't get turned because he was coming from my weak side. And so I couldn't get turned because he could just see everything. And like, it was one of those days too, where I did not have a stitch of wind, and he was coming in so close that my scent probably would have blown over top of him, because he was coming in behind me. And I was like, if I can just get a gust of wind for like, I just need a little bit and he won't wind me, and I can probably get turned and shoot him once he gets to my strong side, I'll be good, but he got directly behind me at 5 yards, and I could not. It was like Tommy Boy sitting in the boat, could use a little wind here. Like, that was exactly the scenario. You know what I mean? Like, that was exactly the scenario. It's like all I needed was like a little bit, and I probably would have been able to slip a shot off. But as fate would have it, I had no wind whatsoever, and he got to 5 yards, and he hit my ground scent, and he just looked directly up at the tree, and there I was, and I couldn't do anything. But
that sounds a lot like the Missouri buck that I missed. Just in those situations like that where everything is on edge. Oh man, that's the quintessential anxiety of a bow hunter right there, right?
Yeah, it is. It is, and I couldn't do anything. I like, he bound off. It was funny because he didn't like completely blow out. Like, he saw me and he just kind of turned around and like quickly walked the other direction, and he didn't like jump, take off running. Like, there wasn't a lot of drama necessarily. And I'm just sitting there, and I literally just started laughing, because I was like, you can't like, I was like, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? I was like, one of the deer I wanted to kill. And the reason I was laughing is because it was such a rookie mistake to like, just not pick your bow up and be ready, just being lackadaisical, man. And it bit me. But, man, I've kept you on here for about an hour and 20 minutes, man. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I have one more question for you that I want to ask you before I let you go, if you're down with it. All right, folks, we had a little technical difficulty on the very last question, but we're going to squeeze this bad boy in, because I always like to ask this question. So this one's kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, Ted. Not going to lie. So we'll see how you answer this one. So I like to close with this one, because I just kind of like to get people's perspective. I had my buddies from Exodus ask me this question on one of their podcasts, and I always thought it was kind of a cool close. And it also gives me some ideas for who else to maybe have on the podcast at some point. But you're building a 3-on-3 basketball team with the best hunters that you know. You can only choose 3. They can be dead, alive, people you know, people you don't know. Doesn't really matter. Who are the 3 hunters you're going to put on your team if your life depended on the 3 of them filling tags?
Andy May, myself, and man, that's tough. That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a tough one, man. It's not an easy question whenever you're putting. You can only choose 3, because I mean, like, we both know a lot of really good hunters, right? So it's like, it's hard to kind of narrow them down.
Specific to deer hunting?
Specifically deer, yeah. Bow hunting, whitetails.
Zach Farrell.
Man, our 3 is almost the same. Mine was Zach, Andy May, and Joe Rentmeester. Yeah. Those are my 3. But I might have to add you to my list, man, because you get it done with some regularity, brother. So I might have to put you in you would be on in my starting 5. How about that?
Well, hopefully after this year I'll make a cut.
Right. Nice, man. Well, hey, dude, I appreciate you coming on, brother. Technical difficulties or not, it's always a good time catching up with you and chatting and sharing a bourbon with you. Before I let you get out of here, though, let folks out there listening know where they can follow along with your outdoor excursions.
Yeah, thank you. It's Ted on YouTube and Teddy Bright 21 on Instagram and Ted on Facebook.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.